Hello everyone and welcome to the Plants But Better channel. My name is Adina and this is part 2 on how to get the most out of your moss pole. If you want to know how to build a moss pole that will last longer, you can check out the previous video, which is the part 1, in which you'll see step by step, with quite cinematic footage I must add, how to build one from scratch. Now, to make this video a bit more interesting, we are not only replacing an older moss pole with this new one, we are also going to discuss the benefits of moss poles, why the heck should I even bother with one, and I will be answering some of the most common questions about moss pole. So let's get started. If you know about my previous video, you also know that I have a neglected plant that will receive all of the love and attention today, and that plant is none other than Philodendron Jose Buono. I don't know if you can see how big this is, but now it's on the floor and this is the newest leaf. A little backstory, this plant was a top cutting since June 2023, which is roughly 1 year and 4 months. And look at the size of it. It's big, it's invasive almost, and trust me, it was not spoiled, meaning I didn't give it that much attention. It got medium light, that's why the variegation is not top notch, and the plant is also a bit leggy. The distance between the nodes could be better, especially the last few nodes. Other than that, it was a very low maintenance plant for me. Let me know in the comments if your Jose Buono was the same, because I was pleasantly surprised about the resilience of this plant. The older moss pole, as you can see, it's pretty basic. It's just moss and mesh. It's small and it dries out very fast. During summer, I was watering the plant at night and the next morning it was already dry. Our new moss pole, however, it will keep the moisture locked in for a longer time and it will help the plant get a new fresh start. As you can see, the older moss is moist already. I'm going to start by cutting the older zip ties, and in the meantime we could talk about the first curiosity I hear from people. What is the purpose of a moss pole and why should I get one? For starters, you could think of a moss pole as an additional support for your climbing plants. The pole will mimic the plant's natural environment. Think of pothos, for example, in nature. A lot of them grow on trees, and a moss pole is basically an indoor tree for your plant. The pole will help the plant develop aerial roots, and given the necessary nutrients and light, the plant will grow bigger leaves and stronger stems. You can also see the case of this Philodendron Jose Buono that it has longer aerial roots and it also has thick stems. If you remember the transparent liner from the previous video, now it's also a great idea to use it as a potting mat. Especially for this table, we want to minimize the exposure to humidity as much as we can. The next question worth mentioning is, do moss poles work for all types of plants? Short answer, no. I mean, a moss pole for a snake plant would be pretty much pointless, but plants that could be trained on moss poles could be different types of monsteras, philodendrons, pothos, syngoniums, and plants that are climbing in general in nature. Non-climbing plants or plants that naturally grow in bushes like peace lilies or even crawler plants like Philodendron gloriosum, for example, won't benefit from moss poles. It's not even possible to train them on poles, they will just ignore it, especially the bushy plants. And making a moss pole is also a lot of work, and the supply, especially the moss, is not the cheapest material to use. So I would use moss poles only for the plants I really want to see growing big, beautiful and strong leaves. So save your supplies for the plants you really love. This is going to take a while because we will try to be as gentle as possible. I think it's better to do this without hurrying up because you could break a lot of roots. And right now we are very close to winter and the temperatures are dropping and we don't want this plant more damaged than it needs to be. How do I train a plant to climb a moss pole? If you want to have great results, try introducing a moss pole when the plant is young and also in the growing season. If you want the plant to produce big leaves eventually, put it on a moss pole when it has 4 or 5 leaves or even less and gently tie the stems to the pole. You can use Velcro tape like we are using right now, gardening wire, clips, or any other option available to you. This way the plant will start to grow and get used to the moss pole and also start growing those aerial roots through the moss. But what about mature plants? Technically, you can also train them, but it could take a bit more time to adjust. Right now, we're kind of doing the same thing, but I have realistic expectations since the last nodes I have on this plant are not as sturdy as the first ones. What should I do if my plant is not attached to the moss pole after several weeks? There could be several reasons why your plant is not adjusting, but more often than not, it's because the humidity is low and we forget to water the moss. If the moss is bone dry, it will not help your plant produce aerial roots, or even worse, if the plant has aerial roots, they will dehydrate, get brown and die. We have some brown roots on this philodendron as well, and we will cut them off. So make sure that the moss is evenly moist. Don't forget to use Velcro when the plant grows, so you won't have unpleasant surprises when your plant could snap. But don't worry, this doesn't happen that often, especially if you keep the humidity in check. Most plants will develop new growth already pretty attached to the moss pole. The snapping situation could happen if your plant outgrows the moss, like is the case with this philodendron. And when it happened, I just added some plastified smaller poles so I could support this plant until I had a better option. We successfully removed the moss pole and we didn't even lose a crazy amount of roots. I mean, these are pretty manageable. These are the only roots we lost. The great news is the main root, the stronger one, is still in one place and very healthy. We are going to change the old pot to a slightly bigger pot, also a pot a bit thicker, and it's going to help us stabilize the moss pole in one place. I will add some additional moss at the base of my moss pole. You could use substrate, you could use rocks. I'm continuing with moss because my plant is growing in moss already. And for the lack of a better material, I will use this block of cement that I have from another project and place it on the base to stabilize the moss pole. This will help the moss stay in one place since it's super heavy. However, if you don't have this, you could use rocks, no problem. I am continuing with rocks in just a second. How often should you mist a moss pole and why is it important? If you have this type of moss pole that has this transparent liner on the back, you won't need to worry too much about constantly misting the pole. I water the moss pole when I water the whole plant. This is possible only because this moss pole doesn't dry out so quickly. So let's say I'll water it once a week during summer and once every 2 to 3 weeks during winter. It really depends. Keep in mind though that the winter here is harsh and also the amount of light is scarce. If you have hotter temperatures, can provide a good amount of ventilation and have plenty of light, you might want to water your plants and moss poles a bit more often. What type of moss is typically used for moss poles? Check the sources you buy sphagnum moss from and don't be afraid to splurge a bit more on good quality moss. I've said this before, and as we've discussed in the previous video, you shouldn't buy extremely cheap moss from sketchy sources since it could be nasty, unclear, dirty and full of bugs, and that could affect the growth of your plants or even infected with pests. As a tip, sphagnum moss that comes from New Zealand is very high quality and also from Chile. I left some links in the description if you're interested. The moss is more premium, has less impurities, keeps the moisture locked in for longer, and it's also more pleasant to use. How long does a moss pole last? Is it also reusable? It really depends on the type of plant and the DIY project you choose to build. This moss pole could last for years without a problem because we used galvanized wire mesh that will not get rusty and the structure is very sturdy. If you used plastic mesh, some parts of it might crack after some time due to the sun exposure or even the expansion of the aerial roots. But the real estimate is actually depending on how fast the plant is developing. To make a moss pole last longer, you can extend it for taller plants. The structure, however, could be used for years and years to come. So in this regard, it is reusable. You will only be replacing the moss, exactly like we are doing in this video. And I say that only because if you want to achieve bigger and bigger leaves, or if you want to propagate your plant, you will need at some point to take a top cutting and start growing your plant again. If you propagate, it's better to use the moss from the pot to grow your new propagations rather than try to reuse it and put it back in the pot. It's a bit more convenient that way, and your plant is already used to the older moss. And what do you think about our plant? It's so big that I can't even fit it in one frame, so I will add here a footage of this beautiful philodendron. And pretty soon I will be needing another extension for this moss ball because it will get big. This project is even better than I expected because I can take the plant like this without falling apart. So we made a great job today. If you want to know exactly how I built this pole, the video will pop up in my right or left side, and it will include everything: what materials to use, how much to use, where to find it, even measurements. Everything is very detailed. Thanks for watching this video as well, and if you have more curiosities about moss poles, feel free to comment and I'll get back to you. And until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and your plants.